Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Caraba. I am a director here at the club and also have the privilege of serving as chairman of the Public Affairs Committee. So on behalf of the Union League Club, I am very pleased to welcome you today to today's luncheon, and thank you especially for coming out on such a challenging weather day. We have collaborated often with the Illinois Academy of Criminology and have had a strong partnership with the IAC's pursuit of our shared mission to sustain and improve our criminal justice system. I want to thank Ed Mogul and the Illinois Academy of Criminology for their steadfast friendship and for bringing today's program here to the club. This luncheon is very much in keeping with our own tradition of civic affairs, leadership, and has special significance to the Union League Club and its members. Several years ago, today's featured honoree, the Honorable George Leighton, received our club's Distinguished Public Service Award. We offered him this recognition because, like the IAC, we were deeply impressed by Judge Leighton's legacy of leadership and grateful for his tireless efforts to advance justice in our society. And today, we are very much delighted to join forces with the Academy as they bestow upon Judge Leighton the prestigious Norval Morris Justice Award. So again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Union League Club of Chicago, and congratulations to all of the honorees. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Art Lorigio. As its current president, I welcome you to the 2014 Institute of the Illinois Academy of Criminology. I thank the Union League Club of Chicago for partnering with us on this. I have wonderful day in my notes. I guess it's not so wonderful, but it's wonderful that you're all here and that you weathered the storm to be with us. But it's a wonderful day because we're honoring two champions of justice, one young, one old, who have made unique and indefatigable strides on behalf of those who seek fair and equitable treatment in the criminal justice system. As many of you know, the Illinois Academy of Criminology is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to stimulating the interest of its members and the public in the study of criminology and criminal justice, promoting scientific inquiry, research, and publication, and presenting the results of relevant studies and research by means of lectures, addresses, and publications. Please visit our website. We are also dedicated to paying public homage to professionals of many stripes for their achievements and accomplishments in a broad range of domains. All of their activities are aimed at better understanding and significantly advancing justice. Today, we present the Anne O'Brien Stevens Award for outstanding contributions to the field of criminal justice by a woman, and the Norval Morris Award for promoting justice or doing the most to correct injustice. Thank you again for joining us. Please welcome our Master of Ceremonies and former President of the Illinois Academy of Criminology, Professor Ed Mogul.
Thank you all for coming. I have one slight correction to what was just said. In honor of Joey, we've changed the Anne O'Brien Stevens Award to someone who made outstanding contributions to criminal justice. We've dropped the language by a woman because that no longer is appropriate. Now, I don't know if you're aware of it, but everybody here is extremely distinguished, and you have name tags, so I encourage you to talk to each other. Most people don't come together in real time anymore. A lot of the meeting is by internet and virtual, so this is really an extraordinary occasion. We have over 90 people who registered for an event like this. I think you're to be congratulated for being here. I urge you to look at the program. The Academy's been at this since 1950, when we were founded by Ernest Burgess at the University of Chicago, and he was a champion of applying social science to criminal justice. And if you look at the list of distinguished presidents in this book, you'll see the names of Hans Madik, Norval Morris, Ben Meeker, and so on, who are legendary in the field of criminal justice reform. If you look at the second to the last page, this is the relief at the top of the Code of Hammurabi, written in 1750 BC. It's in cuneiform in the language, the Akkadian language. But notice, this is the code, you know, that goes into lex talionis, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But what's significant about this image is that Hammurabi, the most powerful man in the world at that time, had to receive the laws from Shamash. The law sometimes is not enough. And E.A. Spicer, who's a famous Assyriologist, said of this image that it's an indication of the beginning of the idea of rights, that there's something beyond the power of the emperor, something beyond the law that we have to be aware of. And I think that's a very sensitive reading of what we want to focus on here today, and that is that the law sometimes is not enough. Sometimes we need heroic people to focus our attention on justice. Now, I hope that you will begin serving. You can do that because I do want to mention some of the people who are here, and if I omit you, forgive me. Don't stand up and don't applaud, but just listen. We have with us Patrick Reardon, who's the first Assistant Deputy Public Defender, June Lapidus, who's a Professor of Economics at Roosevelt University. I want you to just hear the variety of people who've come together today. Locke Bowman, who's the Director of the MacArthur Justice Center, Dave Olson, a Professor of Criminology at Loyola, Lincoln Davis. Has he arrived yet? I'd like, when he comes here, for you to see him. Lincoln Davis is a poet, and I don't know that we get to see many poets. Christine Newman is here. She is a former editor of Chicago Magazine. Carol Brook is here, the federal defender. We're honored to have with us Judge Paul Biebel, who is the Chief Judge of the Criminal Court. Liam Hanneman, who is with the Transportation Safety people. Chris Welsh, who's an engineer. Patrick Sheehan, who's chairman of the Woods Fund, which has invested recently in projects involving restorative justice. He's also a board member of the Harris Theater, and he's on several civic-related boards. We have Matt Rodriguez with us, who is a former superintendent of the Chicago Police Department. Carol Goldbaum, licensed clinical social worker and human services administrator. We have the Neal Law Firm. We'll more about them later. Gareth Morris, who is the son of Norval Morris. Morris Shapiro, former public defender and administrative law judge in the Illinois Department of Public Health. David Potash, who is the president of Wright College. We have the Honorable Jacqueline Cox, a judge. Honorable Benjamin Backoff, also a judge. There is the Honorable Sharon Colman, a judge. And I want to call to your attention Dean Marask, who is a former chief of criminal prosecutions for the state's attorney. We have him here just for balance. And Reverend Nan Conser, a minister of the United Church of Christ. Cindy Anger, a rabbi of Orthodox, and before she became a rabbi, she was a student at New York University Law School, which lawyers here know was a fine school. And before that, she was with what law firm, Rabbi?
I was at McDermott and then a public guardian.
And she was with a public guardian, and she mentions the McDermott, Will, and Emery just as an afterthought. And interesting background, don't you think, from the law into the ministry. We are honored to have with us Jackie Rivers, who did a documentary on Mary Powers. Jackie is a documentary producer. Harold Winston, who was the convener of the Chicago Coalition for Police Accountability. There are many more. I'm sorry that if I've omitted them. And now I would like to, Judge Evans, do you want to finish eating, or do you want to come up and say something now? Okay. All right. We are very honored to have a special surprise guest, adding his presence to the occasion. The Honorable Judge Evans, who is the Chief Judge of the entire Cook County court system. Judge Evans.
Thank you very much, Professor, for a very kind and generous introduction. And I want to thank Art Larigio for his kind invitation for me to be here today, and certainly to be a part of this presentation with some great awardees. I certainly wanted to be here to share at least my experience with both Norval Morris and the Honorable George Leighton. Of course, Judge Leighton and his name now rings throughout 26 in California, where presiding Judge Paul Biebel and the judges of the Criminal Division of the Circuit Court of Cook County preside and do their work every day. But long before George Leighton was recognized and given that high achievement, among other things, he was a teacher at the John Marshall Law School, where I was a student. And he was a marvelous, marvelous teacher, willing to share his experiences with the students as a lawyer, doing work every day, but also as a person who had appeared before the Supreme Court and a person who had succeeded on many of the cases that he was training young law students about. But I had an opportunity to not only matriculate under the auspices of George Leighton, but also to work with him once I became Chief Judge. And at an occasion like this, where George Leighton was being honored on another occasion, we sat through and enjoyed his speeches. And after that speech, he said to me that he'd like me to provide some material for him in a case that he had been involved in, and that he was going to be considering writing a book. And I told him I'd be happy to provide whatever I could, and I asked him if he knew the name of the case that he had represented a client on, and he paused for a moment. He said, it was my case. And I thought to myself, yeah, of course it would be your case, you're the lawyer. who was the defendant so I can get the file for you. He said, I was the defendant, meaning himself. And I thought to myself, I must be getting confused here. Got to be something wrong. He's one of the greatest judges I've ever met, and he's talking about he was a defendant. And I said, well, what kind of a case was it? He said, well, I was indicted, and I want to get the file from that indictment, and I'd like to get copies of the pleadings that were involved. I paused, I looked at his son-in-law Bob, who was here with us today, and I started to question Bob about it further, but I thought, no, maybe I better just check it out. I did get that file, and I discovered why it was that he wanted to get some of the pleadings from that file. As most of you probably know, he had advised some clients that they had every right to move into a certain area in the Chicagoland community, and riots resulted from those clients moving in, and George Leighton had been indicted as a person who was inciting a riot by giving legal advice to some individuals who deserved that legal advice. When I got the file and I saw who he was represented by in that particular case, the name was Thurgood Marshall. And Thurgood Marshall had signed the appearance, and of course, the combination of George Leighton and Thurgood Marshall, you know they had to win that case, and they did. I once was campaigning, before I became chief judge, of course, I was a member of the city council, and I was involved in some other political activities, and I was campaigning in my community in Hyde Park on one occasion, and I knocked on a door, and the person who opened the door was Norval Morris. And I had never met Mr. Morris before, and he told me his name, and I said, oh, are you the author of a book that I just read, Honest Politician's Guide to Justice? He said, yeah, I wrote that book. And we became great friends, and I know that he was committed to justice. I know that he would be pleased to know that George Leighton would be receiving an award in his name on an occasion like this. George Leighton, I'm told by both Bob, who is here, and Benjamin Macoff, Judge Benjamin Macoff, who is seated at a table here to my left, that at 101, almost 102, George Leighton is still the same George Leighton we always knew. Bright, talented, capable, able, never hesitating to move forward. And the one good thing about all of these awards and recognitions that George Leighton is receiving is he doesn't have to receive those awards posthumously. He is alive to know how grateful our community, the legal community, is for the work that he has done. So I thank you, Professor, for giving me an opportunity to comment. Thank Art Lorigio for the invitation, and I wish all of you Godspeed. Thank you very much.
All right, the good news is we're going to finish our lunch, and then after there is a brief PowerPoint on Judge Leighton, and then Judge Leighton's remarks, which were filmed last week at his home in Massachusetts, will be presented, and then we will present the award to Judge Leighton's daughter in person here. I do want to ask just a couple of people to stand. Stand when I finish. One is Michelle Morrison, who is the CEO of Youth Guidance. And Youth Guidance reaches 14,000 at-risk youth in some of Chicago's most distressed communities. Their program, Becoming a Man, has demonstrated a 44% decrease in violent crime arrests and significant reduction in school failures. I want to recognize this person for her outstanding actual accomplishments. Would you please stand, Michelle Morrison? I want to mention that we had a program 2 years ago about the new Women's Court at 26 in California, which was the work of the most innovative criminal court chief judge we've had. And there was no sense, I think it was decided, that 111 women would be in the penitentiary for prostitution. When they come out, they would just go back to the same lifestyle. So there is evidence of social science alternatives being used in some cases effectively. I also want to call attention to two other individuals, and I'll ask them to stand when I finish. Adult Redeploy is a state-funded grant initiative to expand local alternatives to incarceration for nonviolent offenders. Adult Redeploy is one of the few grant programs that was given an increased budget because of its success rate. Adult Redeploy works through 18 sites throughout Illinois, covering 34 counties, to incentivize having those counties find alternatives to the penitentiary for nonviolent offenders. I'd ask Marianne Dyer and Lindsay LaPointe to stand. They work with Illinois Redeploy. Where are they? That's another very effective organization, another way to get people out of the penitentiary when they don't belong there. Lindsay LaPointe and Marianne also work with the Criminal Justice Information Authority. We had a program there. The Academy had a program with Andrew Papachristos in March on the network analysis of gun violence. And we gave Lindsay LaPointe a scholarship when she was a student, a criminal justice student, so we bet on a winner. That's another thing the Academy does. We do give scholarships to people with promise. So I hope I haven't disturbed your digestion. Please finish your meal, and then we will have a wonderful brief PowerPoint on the judge, and then you'll hear the judge's words himself, and then on to the final award for Joey Mogul. And I just did want to recognize a couple more people. Judge Leighton is associated with the Neal and Leroy law firm, and I'll ask the attorneys from Neal and Leroy and staff who are here to please stand and be recognized. This is Judge Leighton's law firm, and staff too, so thank you. I just found out that Jeanette Sublett, who is one of the attorneys, is the daughter of Sam Sublett, who is one of the presidents of our academy. Sam was in corrections for most of his career, and we were proud to have him as a distinguished past president. Remember I told you about the poet? He's here now. Would Lincoln Davis please stand so you can look at him, you Philistines? There he is. Okay. This is another kind of special situation, but 3 days ago, this young man graduated from the University of Chicago. Although he was raised on the Northwest Side, he is fluent in Japanese and Chinese, and he has just landed a job in the real world in an international commercial firm headquartered here in Chicago. He is a black belt in judo, and this is almost too good to be true. He spends part of his summers teaching inner city blind and deaf children judo. Michael Sarche, would you please stand? He's red in the face, but there he is. There are others. I'm sorry if I'll catch up with this list. All right, now we're very honored to have a partner in Jenner and Block, Jeff Colman, who is a friend of Judge Leighton, who has kindly prepared a PowerPoint, which I hope if there's a pillar between you and the screen, please rearrange your seat so you can see this PowerPoint. I call Jeff Colman forward. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's a great privilege for me to be here today as your Academy presents the Norval Morris Justice Award to George Leighton, a dear friend and an inspiration to so many of us. I've known Judge Leighton for 37 years. I've known him as a judge, as a friend to me and my family, as a mentor and an inspiration to so many. Judge Leighton is an inspiration as a person, lawyer, judge, civil rights advocate, advocate for justice in our criminal law system, death penalty opponent, and as a family man. And his daughter Barbara and her husband Robert are here with us today, and we've become dear friends over the years as well. It's totally appropriate for your Academy to present the Justice Award to George Leighton, named after Norval Morris. When I was in law school, as Judge Evans noted, Professor Morris's book, The Honest Politician's Guide to Crime Control, was required reading. Later, I had the privilege of working with Norval on several criminal justice reform issues. Norval Morris's commitment to improving our system of justice was unparalleled. I've been asked to say a few words about George Leighton and his efforts to promote justice and correct injustice in our criminal justice system. I could spend hours talking about this subject. Indeed, young lawyers at our law firm have videotaped George Leighton for over 20 hours talking about the matters that I'm going to summarize briefly today. So first, I'd like to tell you a few things about George Leighton in the event that some of you do not know about his life, and then about a few of his contributions. George Leighton is now 101 2/3 years old. This photograph was taken when he was 98. To put things in context, William Howard Taft was President of the United States when George Leighton was born on October 22nd, 1912. George was the son of parents who were born in the Cape Verde Islands off the northwestern coast of Africa. No English was spoken in his home. The family spoke Creole, a dialect that was based on African dialects and Portuguese. George went to a one-room schoolhouse through the 7th grade when he left school and never attended high school. As a child, George spent 7 or 8 months a year picking blueberries, cranberries, and strawberries, and on his 100th birthday, he took Tom Sullivan, my wife Nancy, and me, and pointed out to us where he picked cranberries in the patch that still exists near New Bedford, Massachusetts. George was a captain in World War II. He fought at Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Green Island, and Finch Island, and was awarded a Bronze Star. But when he was 24 years old, before the war, he enrolled as a provisional student at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and then graduated Phi Beta Kappa and was awarded a scholarship to go to Harvard Law School. He graduated from Harvard Law School after the war and moved to Chicago in 1946, he says, because Big Bill Dawson was an African-American man who was a congressman from Chicago, and he wanted to come to a city where African Americans could serve in public office. When George moved to Chicago, he could not join the Chicago Bar Association. He could not rent space in the Loop. He could not eat in most restaurants in the Loop. He could not get picked up by taxi cabs, and he was not permitted to be a member of this august club. As a lawyer, George fought race discrimination in housing, education, voting, jury selection in Illinois and throughout the Deep South. In 1964, he was elected a judge of the Circuit Court of Cook County. In 1967, he became an appellate court justice. And in 1976, a Republican president chose George Leighton to be a federal district court judge. George had been a lifelong Democrat. Things have changed a little bit in those years. George retired from the bench in 1987 at the age of 75, and then he practiced law for 24 years with Earl Neal, Lang Neal, Jeanette Sublett, and their spectacular colleagues at what is now called Neal and Leroy. George retired at the age of 99 in 2011, and I can tell you the only reason he retired was because of mandatory CLE requirements, which he didn't. So today, Judge Leighton has the post office in New Bedford, Massachusetts, named after him. As Judge Evans noted, and Judge Evans and Judge Biebel were instrumental in this, the courthouse at 26th Street is now named after him. And George Leighton truly loves being a member of the Union League Club. So that's George Leighton. Here are but a few examples of the extraordinary contributions he's made to improving our criminal justice system. And I will skip through some of this because I know that people need to leave. But the examples in 5 categories, as Judge Evans mentioned, George Leighton as a defendant, George Leighton as a lawyer, as a judge, as an opponent of the death penalty, and finally as a beggar for justice. George as a defendant. It was 1951. George Leighton advised Mr. and Mrs. Clark that the lease they signed to move into an apartment in Cicero, Illinois, was legal and binding. They started moving their belongings into the apartment, and a race riot ensued. More than 2,000 white people burned buildings in the neighborhood of that apartment building in Cicero. A grand jury was convened. The grand jury indicted George Leighton and others for conspiracy to diminish property values and conspiracy to incite a race riot. As Judge Evans noted, and I thank him so much, and Judge Biebel, for getting these materials, Thurgood Marshall came from New York to represent George Leighton. This is a copy of the appearance form of Thurgood Marshall that Judge Evans and Judge Biebel retrieved for us. They filed a motion to quash the indictment, and the state agreed to dismiss the charges against Judge Leighton. Noli pros up in the top. Judge Biebel does that all the time, right, Judge? For our community, this was an extraordinary event. But for George Leighton, as those of you who have spoken to him know, he defines this as one of the most important moments in his life because The lesson for him was that when he became a judge, he always thought about a case from the perspective of the judge, but also what it was like for the defendant to be standing there facing criminal charges, as George Leighton did. Another example, Robert Goldsby was indicted in Carroll County, Mississippi in 1954 for killing a white woman. The killing occurred, according to the Fifth Circuit's opinion, after the woman's husband ordered, quote, Negroes, end of quote, to leave his gas station and dairy barn. Mr. Goldsby, through an aunt in Chicago, hired George Leighton to come down to Carroll County, Mississippi to try his case. When he got there, the white lawyers in Mississippi refused to participate in a case with a so-called Negro lawyer. So George was discharged. Goldsby was convicted, sentenced to die. On appeal, George took over the appeal, convinced the Fifth Circuit that the motion that George had prepared but was never filed, claiming that there was race discrimination in the manner in which the grand juries and the petty juries were selected, was true, and the conviction was reversed. Nephew versus Illinois. Henry Nephew was convicted in Cook County in 1938 for murdering a policeman, sentenced to 199 years in prison. George Leighton was later appointed to represent him, filed a post-conviction motion claiming that the prosecutors knew that witness had perjured himself when he said that there was no leniency or promises of leniency. It went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. George prevailed, and on remand, Mr. Nephew was released from custody. Those are a few examples in the criminal justice area. George as a judge. 6 months after George Leighton became a state court judge, he presided in a bench trial over a case involving 2 men accused of attacking a police officer. He found them not guilty. The police department asked for George Leighton's resignation. The police department asked that he be sent out of the criminal courts. J. Edgar Hoover condemned the state court judge in Chicago, George Leighton. The Chicago Tribune editorialized against him, and thankfully, the judges of the Circuit Court of Cook County, the presiding judges, the executive committee, ruled in George's favor and refused to remove him from 26th Street. This isn't about whether George was right or wrong. This is about judicial independence, and to the credit of the Circuit Court of Cook County, they stood behind George Leighton, and George, this is in his first 6 months as a judge. George and the death penalty. This is from the 1964 Saturday Evening Post. Lloyd Miller was accused of killing Janice May and raping her, a young girl in downstate Illinois. This is a picture of George from the Saturday Evening Post in 1964. Key piece of evidence in Miller versus Pate, for some of those who don't know it, was prosecution evidence that they found the little girl's underwear with blood on it, and it was her blood. Case goes all the way through the state court system. George Leighton and Willard Lazarus, with an expert, discovered that this was not blood at all. This was red paint. And they prevail, and Mr. Miller is released. And last, Townsend versus Sane. George twice argued the Townsend case in the United States Supreme Court. It defined, at least before Congress passed the anti-terrorism limitations on habeas corpus, Townsend, through George Leighton's efforts, defined when an individual is entitled to an evidentiary hearing in challenging a state court conviction. Lastly, George as a beggar. I had the extraordinary experience of going to Governor Quinn with about a half a dozen Jenner and Block lawyers and George Leighton, to urge the governor to sign the legislation abolishing the death penalty. The lawyers, including myself, made legal arguments to the governor as to why he should sign this legislation. And George Leighton was our final speaker. At the age of 98 in 2011, George said this to Governor Quinn in his deep and melodic voice. "Governor, I'm not here to make legal arguments. I'm here as a beggar for justice, and I implore you to sign this legislation and bring Illinois back into the civilized world." It was one of the most moving things I've ever seen, and it would have been moving if he had been 40 years old. But to see your father, Barbara, conduct himself like that with the governor, and really, it was instrumental. Several years ago, in conclusion, then Senator Barack Obama wrote a letter to George Leighton noting the words of Dr. King, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and it takes people like George Leighton to bend it." So I hope this short presentation has given you some idea of the extraordinary contributions of this amazing man and why he is a very worthy recipient of an award named after the beloved Norval Morris.
Hello,
Good
how are
day to you. How are you?
Good, good, thank you. How are you? Come on in, please.
That's good. I'm Professor Mahan.
Nice to meet you. My
Yeah.
name is Sarah.
Sarah and Jesse.
University of Chicago.
Yes.
Oh, you
Yeah.
know
Norval Morris.
Norval Morris.
Yeah,
So he made Adam a thinking being. And then he decided to give Adam a connection. So he gave this animal, Adam, a heart.
Ah.
A heart that beat, that could tell wrong from right. That's how God then decided to give this animal, Adam, a mind and a heart. That's how justice is discerned from injustice. The interplay of the mind and the heart. And it's been like that ever since. But he gave the man forgiveness to live over again a second time. And thus, justice is found when that second time comes around. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for that wonderful summary. And now, it is our honor to have Judge Leighton's daughter and son-in-law come up here, and we will have our president give them the Norval Morris Justice Award from the Illinois Academy of Criminology.
On behalf of the Illinois Academy of Criminology, I present the Norval Morris Justice Award to the Honorable George Leighton, one of the most deserving recipients of this honor. Thank you so much.
Norval Morris, for whom this award was named, was a dean of the University of Chicago Law School, and the Guardian said upon his death in 2004 that he was the most influential criminologist at that time. We have with us Norval Morris's widow, Elaine, and his son, Gareth Morris, who is a federal litigator. I ask them to stand to be recognized. Norval is beloved, and as you saw, Judge Leighton responded immediately to his name, and he has told me he was very grateful that he received this award. And I want now, at this point, to mention that the first person you saw in that 2-minute video of Judge Leighton was one of our past presidents. He was the head of Rikers Island. He then went into academia at John Jay and then at the University of Illinois. His name is Jess Mann. He was a mentor to many of us. There are many distinguished past presidents, if you look in the program, penologists, academicians, novelists, all the cross-section of people interested in criminal justice. We have some of our past presidents here today, and I ask if they're able to, that they stand. And then at the end, would you please acknowledge them? Elvis Slaughter from the Sheriff's Department was a past president. Patty Bannis, a training specialist with Sussex Management. She's been training officers for over 25 years. Mary Powers, who is going to give a presentation. Seymour Adler, would you please stand? He was with the Marines, and then he went into youth guidance, and then he became the head of human services in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Matt Rodriguez, the former superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, is an officer of our academy. And who else have I missed here? Okay, and Shirley Melby, our archivist. Will you help Shirley stand, or raise your hand, Shirley? That's Shirley. Mickey Lombardo, behind. Mickey, will you stand? Mickey is an interesting combination of a law enforcement executive who went into academia. He's a professor of criminology at Loyola. He wrote a book on the Black Hand, and he wrote another book. Mickey is another past president. I think that's it, and would you please acknowledge the past presidents of the Academy. Now, if you look in your program, the last part of this award ceremony is our second award, the Anne O'Brien Stevens Award. And I call upon Mary Powers, who I just want to tell you a bit about. Mary was in with the Red Cross in the Second World War, and she has a Master of Social Work degree from the University of Wisconsin, Master degree in Sociology from the University of Wisconsin. She worked for Western Electric and Industrial Counseling, raised a family in Winnetka with 4 children. She worked with the Contract Buyers League, and then when the Panther raid came to her attention, she became a fierce advocate and a legendary advocate for criminal justice. She became involved with Citizens Alert, a police watchdog group in the 60s, and has been active with them ever since. She served as a president of our group, the Illinois Academy of Criminology, in 2003. And last year, a documentary was made about Mary and Citizens Alert called Compelled to Action by Peace Productions. The producer Jackie Rivers is here. I asked Mary Powers if she will make this next presentation. Mary?
Ann O'Brien Stevens was a woman for all seasons. She was an amazing person. I'm really honored to have been able to work with her over the years and have her as a friend as well. Ann had, for someone with no law degree or not even having gone to law school, she had all sorts of interesting career opportunities and made the most of them in criminal justice related work. For several years, her last several years, she worked for the Chicago Law Enforcement Study Group as executive director. This study group was a 501c3 not-for-profit group that did really wonderful research on every aspect of the criminal justice system. We just recently closed our Citizens Alert office, and I gave those wonderful cardboard red-covered reports to the archives at the USC. Ann lived in Uptown, and she immersed herself in all of the social problems that took place in her community. She gave vigorous advocacy to victims of domestic violence, to the homeless, the alcoholics. We served on the board of the Center for Street People together, along with Dick and Nan Conser, who are here. Ann was a wonderful person. She just gave every iota of herself to whatever project she was working in. I know she would have been really proud to have the honor of honoring Joey Mogul with the award that was established in Ann's name. I was a recipient of that award many years ago myself, Joey, and I know Ann would really be proud to have us give you that award. Joey is an attorney with the People's Law Office, as you all know. We honor her actually for her daily dedication to justice, but primarily today for her extraordinary contribution to criminal justice in taking the issue of police torture in Chicago to the UN. We have Joey. Could you join me and tell us a little bit about that?
Well, thank you so much. It's such an honor and privilege to be here with you today, and I humbly accept this award from the Illinois Academy of Criminology. And I have to say, I'm just so honored to be here to also honor Judge Leighton. Here we are in the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer and the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Civil Rights Act, and it's such a great honor to be here to honor him and all the work he did on behalf of civil rights. And it was just such a beautiful presentation, Jeff, so thank you. When Mary called me to tell me the news that I was to receive this award, I will be honest, my first reaction was that I did not want it, and I personally do not believe I'm worthy of this award. But if anyone knows, when Mary Powers asks you to do something, you cannot say no. And the fact is, I didn't want to say no because, Mary, you are such a hero of justice, and you've been a stalwart organizer in the campaign for justice in the Burge police torture cases and in combating police misconduct citywide. It's just such a true honor to be personally receiving this award from you today. It means the world to me, and I continue with others to try to walk in the trail that Mary has blazed for us. So thank you. It was thrilling to present the Chicago police torture cases to the UN Committee Against Torture in 2006, and particularly for one of the highest human rights bodies in the entire world to not only recognize the torture that occurred here in the city, but to hear our pleas for justice. Specifically, after reviewing the evidence that we presented, the UN committee not only noted the limited investigation and lack of prosecution in the Burge police torture cases, but it called on the US government to bring the perpetrators to justice. I personally believe that this finding by the UN Committee Against Torture contributed to the US Attorney's Office here, in conjunction with the US Department of Justice, to indicting John Burge for the perjury and obstruction of justice he committed when he lied about the torture he and others committed at Area 2 and 3 police headquarters. And later, this led to his conviction of all 3 counts in 2010. I do think it was a profound moment in the struggle for justice in these cases, and I think that work still continues in fighting for evidentiary hearings for the men, the Burge torture victims who still remain behind bars, and in trying to seek reparations for the Chicago police torture survivors, most of whom have gotten no financial compensation, and many who still need psychological counseling for the torture they endured. But in accepting this honor today, I don't want to stand here and pretend that I did this alone, because I did not. It was Standish Willis, a renowned criminal defense and civil rights attorney, who first had the idea of bringing the Chicago police torture cases to international fora, wanting the world to understand that there was unfortunately racist torture that occurred here on domestic soil. And it was then Flint Taylor who personally asked me to work with him 17 years ago on the Chicago police torture cases, who thankfully I've gotten to work with for the last 17 years. None of us would be here today if it wasn't for Flint, who has doggedly worked on these cases for the last 25 years, longer than any other attorney I know. And finally, I see Locke Bowman in the audience, who's been who I've also had the opportunity to partner with and work with for several years now, and who championed the cause for getting a special prosecutor back in 2001 to investigate these cases. It's also important to me to recognize Judge Beeble, who's with us today, who righteously and courageously appointed a special prosecutor to investigate the Burge torture cases in 2001, and who recently appointed a special master to determine whether there are Burge torture victims who remain behind bars, and to appoint them attorneys in order for them to have a full and fair opportunity to present their allegations of torture. I also want to recognize my partner in crime and love, and that's Andrea Ritchie, who unfortunately could not be with us today, but she was present with me in Geneva, Switzerland, and helped me present the Chicago police torture cases to the UN Committee Against Torture. And finally, I want to acknowledge all the love and support from my family and friends, who I don't think any of us could do what we do and continue to struggle on and on if it wasn't for those family and friends. My sister, Alyssa, my twin, who's here with us, who's a fierce and ferocious family attorney, much more zealous than I can ever dream to be, who is the femme to my butch and the hetero to my homo. And in case you did not know, to my uncle, yes, we are related, who I love and adore, and who is, I so appreciate his pride and his support of me. I could not be here without him. And finally, to my family at the People's Law Office, and to my loves from Queer to the Left, I don't want to say anything more, but thank you so very much.
Please come. On behalf of the Illinois Academy of Criminology and Mary Powers, I am pleased to confer upon Joey Mogul the Anne O'Brien Stevens Award for Justice.
Thank you all for coming. I thank you for the shared concern we all have about justice.